Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to How to Get Hired. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is the weekly live stream that I do where it's basically Q&A. You get to ask me questions, so I know you're tripping over yourselves to do so. The title of today's episode, this is episode number 138. It's called, What is Your Weakness? How to pass this question. So we're going to be answering that right off the hop, and then we're going to be diving into your questions. Weird, I'm a little out of breath for some reason. I guess I've been rushing around trying to make the moment that this goes live. I think that if you schedule something to start at a certain time, like a live stream on YouTube, and if you don't make it in time, it stops promoting it or something like that. There's been a lot of weirdness like that, so there you go. Yeah, obviously, shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members. Membership has privileges. Also my Patreons, my super thanks donors, and to you, my viewers and participants. You guys are awesome. Thank you for being with me today. We're going to be talking about job search. So if you have a question, anything related to job search, careers, that kind of thing, resumes, interviews, all that stuff, but also networking and all that kind of thing too. Hidden job market. I'm here to help you out. Let's see here. Oh, let's dive into this. Let's talk about the title. Okay, what is your weakness? This is a question you're usually going to encounter in a job interview. It's going to be pretty much almost guaranteed that they're going to ask you this in some way, shape, or form. They may not use the exact words, what are your weakness, or what is your weakness, but you will get this type of question where they probe you about your faults, right? They get you to try and disclose to them what's a reason why they wouldn't hire you, right? That's basically what it is. So they can phrase the question any number of different ways, but basically they're probing you for something bad about yourself. That's the question. It's the negativity question. So the big question is, what can we say to this and not eliminate ourselves? This is the king of trick questions. Like we've talked about before, there's a lot of trick questions in job interviews. There's a trick to them. You know, you can have a good answer or a bad answer. And if you give a bad answer, they, will either eliminate you outright or it'll count against you, And this is one of those questions. So the purpose of it is, a lot of times when a recruiter or a hiring manager is looking at candidates for a job, they're looking at the applicants or any other situation like that. It's almost like the funnel, almost like a marketing funnel. It starts out with a lot of people applying, and then they sort of filter and filter and filter, and then the pool of people gets lesser and lesser, right? And traditionally, the way it would work is that you'd get a lot of applicants for a job, a lot of job applications, and the recruiter would go over these and shortlist a group of people to bring in for interviews, right? There might be a screening interview before that, maybe over the phone, something very brief. There could be, in the case of if you're applying over, a website or whatever, they could have those skill testing questions that they ask you, that you have to answer, what are your salary requirements, things like this, where you can't give anything other than a single number, and they ask you yes or no questions, and those are meant to filter people out. So if you answer unfavorably to any of those, it usually means that your application stops there and it doesn't go on, to be seen by a recruiter or any other human, right? That's the idea. There are 6 people here. Thank you for being here. So that's the idea. Now, then the idea is that you have that pool of candidates, right, that are interviewed. And the way this usually works is that those candidates, every single one of them that's called in for an interview, on paper, they're qualified to do the job. They could do the job, assuming, of course, that everything that they said in their resume was accurate. You didn't lie about their qualifications or their experiences or anything. But assuming that, then they are all qualified to do the job. So when you get to the interview stage, usually what recruiters or hiring managers are confronted with is not like one or two good candidates and then a whole bunch of duds. No, you usually get, several promising candidates, and it's usually quite hard to choose between them because they all would do, right, for the role. So you need ways of being able to filter it down. So if there's one round of interviews or two rounds of interviews, you need some kind of way of filtering people out, right? So that's where this question comes in, the what is your weakness question. It's the most obvious version of this, where they basically say, listen, if we were going to eliminate you for a certain reason, what would that reason be, in your case, right? That's basically what this question is asking, right? So you ask this question, and it's good for the recruiter or hiring manager because then they don't have to really dig deep and peel back the layers to see the negative traits of this person. The candidate just says it, right? What's wrong with you? And then the candidate says, oh, well, maybe it wasn't obvious, but, I really don't feel comfortable with the technical aspects of this job. I don't feel like it's within my scope. I'm kind of hoping it will be, but I feel quite nervous about the technical requirements. And they go, oh, okay, great. Well, thank you for answering that question. And then they eliminate you, right? So that's the idea behind this question, right? It's to get you to reveal the very thing that they can use as a tiebreaker that's going to eliminate you, right, from the running. That's why they ask this. So make no mistake, that's the purpose of this question. And what's interesting about it is that if you ask a lot of recruiters and you say to them, how should somebody answer this question? They give a very self-serving answer a lot of times. They say, well, you should just be honest, right? We just want to know that you understand, A, that you have weaknesses, and B, what they are, and that you're working on them, C, right? How convenient, right? They want you to tell them all the dirt on you, right? Now, I'm not saying that that's universally wrong. I'm sure there are some people out there who, that's what they think the purpose of this question is, and that's how they treat the answer. Congratulations. There are some people, I'm sure, out there that do that. Unfortunately, in the vast majority of cases, and certainly a lot of cases I have personally seen, it doesn't work like that. This question is a trap. It's an ambush. If you give them full and complete information about your flaws and your weaknesses, they simply use those weaknesses to eliminate you from the running, and then they hire someone who did not give them true flaws or weaknesses when prompted in the interview, right? That's how it usually works. So that's the purpose of this question. I see Whatnot is here. Hello to Whatnot. Whatnot does that. Thank you for being here. And there are 16 people here now. You guys are awesome. Hopefully you're getting something out of this. So let's get into maybe some of the specific answers that you can give to this question, right? So first of all, let's talk about the things that you shouldn't do because they're rookie mistakes. They're transparent as hell. And if maybe you think they're clever, maybe you haven't done a lot of job interviews, usually the person on the other side of the table has done a lot of interviews, so they've heard it before and they're not impressed, right? So saying a strength is a weakness. Don't do that. I'm too nice. I work too hard. I care too much about the company. Those kind of things, right? Don't say those. That's very amateur and transparent, and people are going to be laughing. They're going to be laughing internally. I don't know what the look on their face is when they're laughing internally, but in their head, if you could hear their thoughts, they're going, like that. So don't do that, okay? They don't believe you. They've heard it before, and it's an obvious evasion, okay? They don't ask questions for you to refuse to answer them. That doesn't count in your favor, or to quite obviously sidestep them, right? They ask them to get a legitimate answer, right? That's what they're wanting. And if you don't give a legitimate answer, you say, I'm not going to answer that or something, it counts against you, right? It's not like you're the hero here that won with your subtle plan, right? They see through that. So don't say a strength is a weakness. A strength is not a weakness. It's asinine to think that. A weakness is a weakness. And, it doesn't work. The other thing is saying I have no weaknesses. That's equally amateur. Okay, don't say that. They've heard that one before. And once again, it's a deliberate evasion of the question, and they regard that as a hostile answer. You're refusing to answer their question by giving a sort of kiss-off answer. They don't like that, right? It counts against you generally. So don't do that either. What are some other, there's a whole bunch of these, that we've heard. Anyway, as I remember them, I'll mention them. But let's get on with what you should actually say, okay? So hopefully it's obvious what you need to do. You need to give them what seems like a legitimate answer to the question, but yet at the same time, your answer doesn't eliminate you from the running because you've exposed a major flaw, right? So that's the idea. Now, the approach that I advocate for, which is not original to me, is this. You give an understandable side effect of something awesome that you do. Okay? It's an understandable side effect of something awesome. Okay? Of a strength. Right? So what specifically could you say that fits into that description? Well, think of a compromise. Think of a trade-off. Not a compromise, a trade-off. Things that tend to go like this. When one goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa, right? All things being equal, they move like this, right? So the most obvious ones are things like speed versus quality, right? How good of a job do you do? Usually, generally speaking, the faster you go, the less good your quality of your work is, right? If you go really, really fast, the advantage is that it's done very quickly, but the disadvantage is you didn't really have a chance to put any real care into it, right? Or attention to detail. Now you think of the opposite of that. If you go very slow, it gives you an opportunity to put a lot of care and a lot of attention to detail into what you're doing so that you get a better result. But the disadvantage, of course, is that it takes longer, right? So they tend to go like this, like as one goes up, the other goes down. So that's what I mean by a trade-off, right? Another example of that is, there's a whole bunch of these, but like you could say, we're talking about speed versus quality. You could say, like if you talk about as an employee, maybe you invest in relationships. You're a very friendly person. You have very good manners. You pay attention to etiquette and protocol to make sure that other people that interact with you have a good experience and they like you. Things like this. So you take the trouble to say please and thank you and to do things properly, right? To take the time away from your desk or your workstation to go socialize with people, and sort of build relationships. Everybody knows you, everybody likes you, and so on, right? You could be that type of employee, a more extroverted type employee that cares about that stuff. And there's some definite advantages in that. Everybody knows me. Everybody wants to work with me. Everybody comes to me with questions and I help them out. I'm a great resource for people in this work group, right? The problem, of course, is that takes time and effort. So while you're out socializing, you're at the water cooler talking to people or whatever, there's another employee who's actually at their desk or at their workstation getting on with some work, right? So they produce more output than you do. They're more productive, right? But yet they don't invest in personal relationships, right? The way you do. So that's another trade-off, right? So you can have sort of more charisma and, be more of a team player, but then the output, your work output goes down, right? So that's another trade-off, right? So these are examples of trade-offs. So coming back to the question, what is your weakness? what I recommend is your weakness that you would mention would be some kind of understandable side effect of something great you do. So like think of one of those trade-offs and then say the negative thing. So you would say, for example, I'm not the fastest worker in the group, right? That would be your weakness. I'm not the first one done. I tend to take a little bit of extra time to do my work. But the thing is, I'm the one that produces the best quality work, right? So you're sort of saying, okay, well, this is the payoff of doing that, right? It's a trade-off. Now, for an added bonus, I recommend you say one other thing that you tack on to the end. And that is this weakness that you just mentioned, this thing that you do that's a trade-off, right? Give them another thing that you do that ensures that that weakness you mentioned is never, ever really a problem. Okay, so the example I use, if you said, okay, my weakness is I'm not the first person to be done. I generally take a little extra time to complete my work. But that's because I put more attention to detail and I tend to produce the best quality work. And what I've found is that if I go to my boss and I say, at the time when the boss is giving me the work assignment, I say, in order for me to do that well, I'm going to need this much time. Is that okay? And 90% of the chance the boss says, sure, yeah. So I produce the best quality work, and the fact that I'm a little bit slower, that never ends up being a problem. Okay, so at the end of the day, to sum all this up, what you did is you gave a legitimate weakness. It wasn't a kiss off, it was something legitimate, and it certainly sounds legitimate, but you followed it up with two strengths, two things you do that are awesome, and they can't eliminate you for the weakness because it's clearly a side effect of something awesome, right? So that way you pass the question. You've given something legitimate. It's not a kiss off. It does describe you, but yet you pass because they can't eliminate you on this. And you've also used the question as a platform to say two awesome things about you. Depending on where you are in the world, it's either this or this, right? Probably this one, right? V for victory. Two things. And that's how I recommend you answer this. Let's go over to you guys here in the chat. Alpine's pal says, good morning, Bill. I just wanted to ask you, I feel lied to when people say 90% is just showing up. In my experience, it's 50%. I passed the first test, but if you can't do anything else, what's the point? Yeah, I mean, obviously it depends on context. You know, listen, people can have all kinds of screwy opinions. And the other thing is that people are coming at these things from all kinds of different perspectives. Maybe in some industries, in some circles, you know, 90% is really not that much of an accomplishment. It's like, think of the postal service. If they delivered your mail 90% of the time, would that be good? No, that would be terrible. Think of the space shuttle or, you know, whatever NASA is doing these days. I have no idea. You know, if only 10% of the parts malfunctioned every time they launched the rocket, would that be good? No, of course not. So it really depends on the context. But just as a blanket statement, that's without any particular perspective, that does seem a bit silly, right? 90%, if you're talking about people, is in a lot of circles is usually not trivial. You know what I mean? So, you know, that's one of the more frustrating things that can happen in a job interview, where you give like an answer and then you're given, first of all, somebody tells you something like this. They say, no, that's not a good answer. You know, everyone loves that, right? Human beings, if you haven't figured this out so far in life, human beings hate being told that we're wrong. We hate it. Even when we're wrong, even when it's been demonstrated that we're wrong, we hate being told we're wrong. And it becomes like, you know, this emotional kind of thing, right? Nobody likes that. That's normal human nature. So one of the first things you would learn when learning manners and professionalism is not to do this to people, right? Well, Or if you do it, you expect that they will get upset with you and then start to feel very negative about you personally because you said this, right? It might be accurate, might be understandable, but they're still going to feel this way, right? So the fact that you're dealing with someone who tells you this, that shows you just how tone deaf that person actually is. Okay, so that kind of signals what the culture might be here, or what type of person you're dealing with. You know, there's things that recruiters do that are simply not professional. Like, for example, talking to a candidate about another candidate, saying, "Oh yeah, we're interviewing all these different people, and there's a lot of people," and it's like that does not make people feel good, right? If you wanted to be a diplomat or an ambassador or something like that, these would all be faux pas, right? You talk to people about their competition, right? Or even mention it, because it makes people feel, okay, I thought we had something special here. I thought it was going well, and now you're talking to me about my competitors, right? So it signals far more about these people than, it tells them about you when, they say stuff like this. Sometimes you just walked into a no-win situation. You're dealing with some kind of jackass that, has already decided that they're not giving it to you, and they're just saying this because they're, they don't care. Or it's maybe they do care, but they have absolutely no idea how to be a human being. They haven't read the manual. So they think that this is an appropriate thing to say in an interview, to a candidate. So that's all I can say what's going on there. The solution is better luck next time. Next time, randomly, the odds are is that you will encounter a person who has the brains not to say something like that to you. And then they'll actually be receptive to evaluating you properly. Jopan says, my weakness is that I peacock in interviews. Okay, I have no idea what that is, but good luck with that. Faison says, how about mentioning 2 strengths and 1 weakness? That way you emphasize your strengths more. This approach only applies when both strengths and weaknesses are asked. I gave the answer that I recommend, so it's quite similar to what you're describing. Alpine's Pal says, I tried to answer that question by saying I'm a slow learner, but I still get the job done and I'm improving every single time. Oh yeah, that's another, you bring up a great point with this. The weakness can't be like a major weakness. Like that's what's implied, or I was hoping was implied. If you're giving an understandable side effect of something awesome, by definition, that's not like a major, crippling, show-stopping weakness. You know what I mean? Like if you were to say, they say, what's your weakness? And you were to say, well, I'm sorry, I never learned to read and I don't understand what math even is. It's like, okay, well, for a lot of jobs, that's just a deal breaker, right? There's nothing you can say after that will redeem yourself, Or you say something like, I've had many incidents in my past where I have snapped like a twig and inflicted violence upon people in the workplace, but I'm working on it, sorry, you can't redeem yourself from stuff like that, usually, depending on the context. But in most contexts, you can't redeem yourself after you say something like that. So it can't be this crippling, like show-stopping weakness. It's an understandable side effect of something good. It's by definition something not that big of a deal, right? So if you say something like what you mentioned there and said, I'm a slow learner. Now, it's a judgment call, but to me, that sounds like it's no longer a trivial thing. That's like a big deal. If someone basically says, I'm a slow learner, like you try and teach me and I take way longer than anyone else to learn something, that might be a major drawback, and that's like a showstopper. You know what I mean? Saying I have a horrible temper, it's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter how brilliant you are on paper or how much experience you have. That's unworkable. We're not going to hire someone that's going to get really angry and possibly violent, like every time, they encounter something that's not to their liking. Like, I'm sorry, that's a deal breaker. So that's the other thing that was kind of implied in there, right? Like, I think in my example, I was saying, like, I take a little extra time. It's not quite the same thing as saying I'm a slow learner. It's like a little thing. It's just a little kind of thing. Alpine's Pal says, if I stumble a lot and repeat myself more than once, did I fail the interview? Not necessarily. It depends on the context. And if you are trying to communicate a major thing about yourself in the interview, it's a common thing to say it more than once. In the space of maybe a half an hour interview, you could say it once, twice, 3 times as it keeps coming back into context, depending on what they're asking you. Like, for example, you're trying to get a job as an engineer and you have an engineering degree, like, if you say that more than once, that's not a deal breaker. They say, what's your greatest strength? And then you say, well, I'm a fully qualified engineer. I have an engineering degree, and that enables me to do blah, 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 all these other things. Then they ask you in a different context, maybe a more technical question. You say, well, I learned when getting my engineering degree that that type of problem can't be solved reliably using that approach. You need something else. So you're repeating yourself, but you're basically doing it strategically so that they get the point that you have an engineering degree. You want to end the interview, and when you walk out of there, you want them to know that you do in fact have an engineering degree. You might say it more than once in the space of half an hour. So it's not a deal breaker to repeat yourself, within reason, right? Alpine's Pal says, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What would your previous employers say if you asked them? And I used that answer, and I said this 2-in-1 answer. Okay. Fish ship employee. No questions at the moment, just want to say you are awesome. Well, thank you, fish ship employee. I want to say your name is awesome. And thank you for your kind words. It's great to get that kind of feedback. That's why I do this. Let's see here. Alpine's Pal says, the context is when attending school, work, or any type of team or public event. And their point is that since you showed up, you did a lot of work and you care. But beyond that, I struggle a lot and not show up next time. LOL. Okay. Yeah, we were talking about context before. Here's I know this is just like on the internet, but Alpine's Pal, don't write such long sentences. 1 thought per sentence. Make them shorter. People understand it a lot better, and they can read it a lot quicker, and they can parse it a lot quicker. It's also more clear. So try to change your writing to reflect that. Shorter sentences, 1 thought per sentence, rather than gluing everything into a massive sentence. It helps readability and comprehension. Guy Incognito says, I'm naturally slow at producing sentences, and it has often resulted in them saying, let's just skip that one for now. It's a serious problem. Guy Incognito, listen, you know what the solution is? Preparation, okay? Preparation. You may need more preparation than the standard person for a job interview, but the standard person needs a hell of a lot of preparation to do this stuff well. It's not easy going onto someone else's turf. If you're doing like a physical interview and you're going to somebody else's property, like into their building or whatever, you're out of your comfort zone. You're not on your turf. You're dealing with strange people. The pressure's on, right? You feel like the stakes are high, so you get very nervous. It's very hard to think on your feet under those conditions. Most normal people would have a problem with that. So if that's what you're experiencing, congratulations, you're normal. How does one get good at that? You do it over and over and over again. It's like anything else. Like learning a sport or a musical instrument. Like, you're not just instantly good. You have to practice, you have to rehearse, right? And over time, if you do practice, you do rehearse, you do a lot of these, you end up kicking ass, that's the thing. But, I've seen a lot of younger people that they go to 1, 2, 3 job interviews and then they conclude, oh, I'm just no good at them. It's like, wrong. You fast forward 25 years and you do a job interview, you're going to be kicking ass. You're not going to be nervous. You've seen how this plays out many times before. You know the game, Also, you're looking down maybe at these young whippersnappers that are getting above themselves and you put them in their place, It's like, that's the thing. You're not intimidated by people as much, and you're not intimidated by the situation because you've been in this situation. You know how it plays out. You know what they're going to say next, and you know what you're going to say next, right? So anyway, listen, maybe you've heard me say this before. Maybe you haven't. But I recommend when people prepare for job interviews, you do 2 things, okay? The first thing you do is you work solo, so you learn what the questions are, you figure out what your answers are going to be, and then you work on memorizing your answers so that when you get asked that question, you go, I know what I'm going to say, right? That's kind of the first thing, right? So great, you have the material down, right? And all the other stuff that goes with that, like you practice a couple of like contingency answers. So if they ask you something that you don't understand, you know what to say. If they ask you something awkward that's borderline insulting, you kind of have a response worked out ahead of time. Like things like this. You've got all your material down. Okay, great. The second phase that a lot of people skip to their cost is you then do mock interviews. You then do practice interviews with somebody else, right? If you're a bit more hoity-toity, you can hire a career coach to do this with you. You pay them money and they coach you and they do mock interviews with you. They like, let's do a pretend interview. And then not only is it good practice for you, right? You got someone staring at you, the pressure's on, you're a little bit, out of your comfort zone. And now let's see how well you have memorized your material and how good it is, right? Not only is it good practice, but then they can give you feedback. And they say, you need to speak up. I can barely hear you. You might want to practice like speaking louder. I don't know if you realize this, but you're almost whispering, like they'll give you objective feedback, right? So that's why people hire career coaches. You pay them like by the hour or whatever, and they work with you, right? If the poor man's version of that is you grab a friend or a family member, or if you have several friends or several family members, work with all of them, get them to do a couple of interviews with you, and then in the space of a week, if you could do like 30 or 40 interviews, something like that, maybe in 2 weeks, right? So 3 or 4 a day, 5 days a week. So, in 2 weeks, that'll be 30 to 40 interviews. You're going to like be substantially better prepared. And then interviewing won't be this big, scary, problematic thing that it once was, You know what I mean? So that's like the thing that will get you good at it. So when you walk into a job interview, you've done 40 practice interviews with another person. Okay? You know all the questions, you know the answers backwards, upside down. You're ready for this, You know what to say when they ask you a question you can't answer, or they say something awkward. Like you have the whole thing down. So that gives you confidence, and that enables you to knock it out of the park. So that's what I'd recommend, like how to prepare. Let's see here. Where are we? Not show up next time. So that's Guy Incognito. Yeah, and then you'll have the answers on the tip of your tongue, forefront of your mind, so you won't be like going, for an extended period of time, and then they just decide to move on, right? Fish Ship Employee says, how to come up with stories for tricky behavioral questions like telling about a time you overcame your weakness and helped the team. If you don't have such a story, should I make it up? No, I don't recommend like making things up completely for an interview. It's not usually, for a variety of reasons, it doesn't usually turn out very well. Here's what I do recommend. Hopefully, maybe you might have seen videos of mine or other people talking about how to prepare for behavioral questions. For everyone else, these are the questions where they ask you a question. It starts with, tell me about a time, right? Tell me about a time you showed creativity, doing a work assignment. Tell me about a time you failed at doing something that you had to do as part of your job and, what happened. Tell me about a time you learned something about yourself, when put in a social situation at work. Like there's an infinite number of these, right? So it becomes a problem preparing for each one. You can't do that because there's so many that, it's impossible to just memorize answers to each possible question. So the way you do it is you do it sort of backwards. You come up with 10 stories from your past, okay? You could start with your 10 greatest accomplishments. What are you the most proud of? Have you ever done something and been promoted for it or been commended for it, recognized for it? Did your boss come over and say, way to go? That might be a good story to tell, right? Like that thing that earned you praise at your job, right? So think of 10 stories. 5 of them could be like, your greatest accomplishments, right? The other 5 could be a good cross-section of other things. Like, for example, a conflict with a coworker. You had a conflict with a coworker, either a disagreement or an argument or, whatever. A conflict or a disagreement with your boss, right? When was the time that, you and your boss really didn't agree on something? What happened? How did you handle it? How did it turn out? Right? A time you showed creativity. That's usually good, right? Things like this. There's kind of like, 5 accomplishments and 5 failures / problems, right? That presumably you overcame, right? So what you do is you take those stories and you vet them. You make sure that they're safe to say in a job interview. One of the reasons that makes them safe is that, you tell a story and it's about what you did. And if you did that exact thing on the job today, would that be the right thing to do? Don't tell a story about like how you did something on the job, but it turns out that wasn't the right thing to do. There's a better way of doing it. You know what I mean? Tell a story about like how you did something in the past. And if you were put in that situation again, you would do the same thing again, right? Like it's safe to say it's not you talking about doing the wrong thing. It's about you talking about doing the right thing. Okay. So you make sure that those stories are vetted. You can say them in an interview because you're saying the right thing. Okay. And then you practice telling those stories in one of the standard sort of formats. Probably the most basic format is STAR. You might have heard of that. STAR, situation, task, action, result. All it does is it allows you to tell these stories in a very compact way, like in less than a minute. Because the last thing you want to be doing is telling a story that goes on for 10 minutes and you still haven't gotten to the point yet, right? I never do that, by the way. So situation, task, action, result. Situation. It was 2 years ago. I was working in this role. Task. I was given the job of having to do this as part of my job. Action. Okay, so this thing came up. Here's what I did. Here's, how it played out. And then result. Here was the result. Here's how it turned out in the end, right? So situation, task, action, result. So you practice telling these 10 stories in the STAR format. So you can tell them. They're nice and compact. and they don't have any red flags with them. Okay, so you come to the interview forearmed with these 10 stories. You've memorized them. You've practiced saying them in a compact way. There's nothing wrong with telling these stories. And then when they ask you a behavioral question, no matter what question it is, you're going to pull out one of these 10 stories as an answer. You might have to slightly tweak it on the spot, depending on what they're asking you, but that's your answer. And then no matter what they ask you, you'll have an answer, right? And if you've picked a good sort of cross section of stories of like the 10, right? Then you'll be able to answer any behavioral question that they ask you, right? So that's the idea. Okay, so for example, one of your stories is about your greatest accomplishment. I was given an assignment by my boss. I'd never done that kind of thing before, so it occurred to me to do it this way. So I went and did it. It succeeded dramatically beyond the boss's expectations. The boss promoted me because of my performance handling that assignment. There you go. There's a story. Right? So they say, tell me about a time you use creativity, to solve a problem. You'd bring out that story. They say, tell me about your greatest strength, an example of like your greatest strength being applied on the job. You'd bring out that story, right? Tell me about a time when, you delighted your boss and, inspired your coworkers. You'd bring out that story, right? Like it's an answer to multiple questions. So that's how you prepare for behavioral interview questions. I've done videos on this. If you want more detail, go and watch some of, presumably my videos on how to do that. Or, whatever. Go look at additional resources on that. Where do we leave off here? Let's see here. Alpine's pal. I think, did we do this one already? It says, well, regarding the stumbling and repeating myself question, I'm talking about when I get lost, I tend to say what I've already said. Saying the same thing over and over is pretty annoying in general. Yeah, if you just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again, yes, I agree. But mentioning that you have a certain thing or have done a certain thing 3 separate occasions during a 45-minute or half-hour interview, that's not annoying. If it's relevant, then it's good. It gets the point across. A lot of times, if you just sort of mention something casually, people don't pick up on it. They don't retain it, So if it's important, it might be worth repeating a couple times. Okay, so we did fish ship employee. That was the whole behavioral question thing. Yeah, don't make it up. So tell me about a time you overcame your weakness and helped the team. Well, start with your 5 greatest accomplishments. Could any part of those stories, be an answer to this in any way? If it can, then that's the story you wheel out, right? Presumably, if you had a big win, you overcame a weakness, Maybe your weakness was never having done that before and not really knowing what it looks like, You know what I mean? Like you can adapt your story to be an answer to this. Vitali Shalman says, I'm applying to both leadership roles, my recent experience, and senior developer positions. I use 2 resumes, one for leadership, one for a softer job title, so I don't seem overqualified. On LinkedIn, I keep my leadership title, I want to grow. That's where I want to grow. Could this look inconsistent or misleading? I keep my leadership title since that's where I want to grow. What is the inconsistent part? The fact that you're looking for 2 types of jobs? I don't see that as inconsistent. How could I apply to both types of roles without raising red flags with recruiters? Well, you could just say screw recruiters and get a job the way most people do through networking. And then nobody gives a rat's ass about any of this. If you want to do the job and you have skills in that area and you can bring your skills to accomplish what they're wanting the person to do, then why not? People change careers constantly. It's not inconsistent. You know what I mean? So, you know what I'm saying? Listen, recruiters, they exist to fulfill a very specific type of job, okay? And that's where they're given very specific requirements by a hiring manager. Because the recruiters themselves, they don't know how to do any of these jobs that they're recruiting for, right? They're given a list of requirements by a hiring manager, and then they're told, go out and find me some qualified candidates, right? So, one of the, what's the most standard metric that recruiters use in their perception of things? It's years of experience, right? In a recruiter's mind, if you've been doing a job longer, then that means you're better at it, right? Now, we all know that that's not necessarily true. That's a very flimsy concept. It is true sometimes, yes, but not universally, right? And for example, if you are changing careers, you don't fit into this worldview, this way of assessing someone's value. Because if you're trying to change careers, if you've spent 20 years doing one thing, and then you're trying to change to jump industries to go into this other industry, by definition, you have 0 years experience in the industry you're trying to move to, right? Now, if you had to go through a recruiter every time you change careers, you wouldn't be allowed to change careers, because the first question they're going to ask you is, you're applying for this job. How many years experience do you have? And you say, 0, actually. And they say, well, then how the hell do you think you're qualified to do this? I'm talking to people they've got 25 years experience in this role. You've got 0. How do you think, in what way do you think I would hire you? Right? It's yeah, exactly. If you value people, if you assess their value using that method, you would never never allow anyone to change a career, right? Fortunately, people change careers every day, and they do it by not going through recruiters, because if you have someone that's got a lot of transportable skills, they're highly professional, highly capable, they're very sharp, they very easily learn things and adapt to new situations, and they have a lot of enthusiasm and passion for doing this new role, right? And if the hiring manager sits down with them and has just a free-flowing conversation for 45 minutes, you can tell this person knows their stuff. Maybe they've never worked in this before, but they know a thing or two. And that's how people change careers. They get into that situation. The hiring manager says, you know what? I'm going to give you a chance. We have this entry-level position, or this part-time position, or this casual or contract position. I'm going to give you a chance. You seem like you know your stuff. We seem to click. You seem very professional, very enthusiastic. So, and I look at your resume, I see your background. I mean, you've done some stuff. It's not in this industry, but you seem to be quite capable. I'm going to give you a chance, right? So that's an example of how the recruiter's perspective of placing value on someone is certainly not universal, right? So if you're pursuing 2 possible careers, you've got the sort of management track, you got the developer track, you don't have to worry too much about oh no, I'm only allowed to want one thing and to go for that thing. No, that's not a rule. That's not a thing. Don't be fooled by the fact that some recruiters might regard it that way. Okay? If you've got some real skills and some real ambition and enthusiasm for both these things, and you're wanting to see where the need is that you could fill, pursue both of them. You could do your system here where you've got 2 separate resumes and do it that way. The problem, of course, is that LinkedIn, you can only have one account. So when people look at you, it's a bit more complicated. You look more like a generalist, right? And things like your tagline, it makes you almost have to choose, right? So you want something that's going to be in terms of a tagline and similar things, something that works for both, okay? It's not something exclusively for one or the other. It could be both. right? But I would look on the hidden job market, wake up to the hidden job market. You clearly, at least by what you've said here, you don't give any indications you're looking there. That's where all the jobs are. That's where you don't have to, dance to like recruiters' strange perception of the world. You talk directly to the hiring managers, and, as long as you can contribute and you've got enthusiasm, that's really all you need to get your foot in the door. So anyway, does that make sense? And why am I, it might seem like a very long and weird answer I'm giving you, but it's because you're asking, how can I apply to both roles without raising red flags with recruiters, right? Sometimes it may not be possible to take this approach with the recruiter. You would have to either try and pretend to be a specialist, or if you can't hide it, then don't go through recruiters, go directly to hiring managers. I've done a lot of videos on my channel where I talk about direct outreach and other things like this. I'll do one thing for you right here very quickly. Okay? Just so you know that I'm not making this stuff up. Okay, what is the job search method called direct outreach, and how does it work, and how can I do it? Okay, I'm just want to show you this. Okay, and I encourage everyone to tune into this stuff. This is how most people get jobs, actually. Okay, so direct outreach is a job search method where you proactively reach out to potential employers. Okay, so you can learn all about it here using any AI tools of your convenience, and then learn more. How effective is direct outreach, generally speaking? You don't have to take my word for anything. Direct outreaches can be extremely effective, especially when done thoughtfully and strategically. Blah, blah, blah. A large percentage of job openings, sometimes cited as up to 80%, are never posted publicly. So hopefully you realize that I'm not making this stuff up. It's not just all my opinion. That holds a lot of water. This is where the good jobs are. This is how you get them. Look into it. Alpine's Pal says, I love Zopa. Zone of possible agreement? I just got an idea. One of my weaknesses is that I have medical condition, a bloody nose. I don't know how to get it to stop. Wahaha. I'm sure they'll have never heard that one before. Northern Nomad, changing careers and industries. Absolutely. Quiche Richards. I like Quiche Richards. I like the name. It's like Quiche Lorraine, right? Mr. Quiche Lorraine, that kind of thing. What to do when you don't have access to the numbers and they ask you about numbers? Like, how has the website traffic increased when you were its copywriter? I never had access to the analytics. What context are we talking about? Like, this is your job to be in charge of a website and you don't know what the traffic was? Is that what you're saying? You'll have to give me more information because I don't understand what the situation is. Why are they asking you for numbers? Why do they expect you to have these numbers? And why don't you have them? I mean, if you could sort of answer some of this, then I can maybe start to give you an answer. Rose says, I'm starting my own consulting business and I must promote my services on LinkedIn, but I'm still working as an employee. How should I go about it without harming myself in regard to my current job? Okay, listen. Do I know everything there is to know about consulting? No, I don't. I only know what little I've seen and done. Okay, I'm working as a management consultant. That's my day job. I do YouTube on the side. And the thing is, for me personally, being a technical introvert, what I found is that at least the type of consulting I've been like I do is it needs to build off personal relationships, right? Like when you're giving people advice, maybe you know your stuff, maybe you're giving very solid advice. But the problem is that if people don't know you, the sort of guard goes up, right? Like, why should they buy your advice over anyone else's? You know what I mean? And that's very hard to make a convincing case to people, because whatever you say, they just assume, you're making it up, or yeah, I'd expect you to say that. It's like, you know what I mean? They don't know you, so they don't really see how capable you are, and they don't see that you're valid. You know what I mean? So usually when you start for consulting, this is the challenge that everyone has when they go into consulting is, even if you worked in consulting before, you worked for McKinsey or, Boston Consulting Group in the States, or, or whatever. It's like, okay, yeah, you were working as part of this well-known, well-established entity with a very good reputation, and everybody knows them. So you got your consulting clients on the strength of that brand. You worked for McKinsey. They don't know who the hell you are, but they know McKinsey. McKinsey has been around for a long time. They do a lot of important work, and they're trusted by biggest corporations in the world. Blah blah blah. Right? So you think, oh, okay, I do a lot of work for consulting, so I can just go out on my own and set up myself as a independent contractor that does consulting. Service provider. The problem is nobody knows who the hell you are. You're not known. You're not trusted, right? The only people that know you and trust you are the ones you've already worked with. So if you are marketing yourself to your clients that you had at McKinsey, who you've worked with already, that can carry a lot of weight, right? But if you're marketing yourself to people you've never worked with before, that could be a lot harder. You would have to really lean on the fact that you once worked for McKinsey. You know what I'm saying? So that can be the challenge. So a lot of consulting is based on reputation, which is based on networking and personal relationships. So I would market yourself to the people in your business world or your career, right? I would go to them first and foremost. And by so doing, you wouldn't really risk your job because you're not broadcasting yourself publicly. You're just sort of doing a very targeted kind of thing to these people, right? So that's my personal take. Do I know all about consulting in every industry and every situation? No, I don't. But that's been my personal experiences. So for whatever that's worth, get a bunch of advice from a bunch of different people, a good cross-section of advice, and then try things. Try, various things and see if they work, and you limit the risk of the things you try. So they should be cheap, they should be doable, and you shouldn't take great risks in terms of like possibly sabotaging your day job or something like that. Okay? Where were we here? Okay, so that was Rose. Woes. Alpine's pal says, so you're saying that's the wrong answer? No, I'm not saying anything. You did say that funny answers give the wrong impression. Did I? It doesn't sound like something I would say, considering how many stupid, smart-ass answers I give on this channel. Okay, what are we talking about here? I just got an idea what my weakness is. I have a medical condition, a bloody nose. I know how to get it to stop. Oh, I thought you were joking. The whole bloody nose thing, as in like, bam, I got a bloody nose, that kind of thing, right? Just keep getting punched in the face by everybody. I just can't understand why this keeps happening to me. It's a real weakness. Listen, Alpine's pal, it depends on the context, for God's sake, okay? Like, if you're going to make a joke as an answer, obviously that is highly dependent on what context we're talking about here, right? Okay? Even during a job interview, you go to one interview, you have a great sort of rapport with the interviewer. You guys are laughing and joking and getting along really well. You might say this kind of thing and they just laugh and they say, yeah, I like the cut of your jib. You go to another job interview, they're dead serious. They seem like the person that has never laughed once in their life. Whenever they open their mouth and they speak to you, it's not warm and friendly. It's like in legalese that comes out of their mouth, right? So saying this kind of thing to them would probably get you instantly eliminated and escorted out of the building. You know, I mean, it's highly dependent on context, right? You got to read the room. You got to pick your moments, you know? So it's not a matter of like, is this a good answer or not? It's highly dependent on context, especially when you're talking about humor, right? That's all I can tell you. My close personal friend Keith Richards. I just got that. It's like Keith Richards, right? I know. I'm a quick one. I was distracted by the quiche. I was thinking it's like an omelet in a pie, and I'm thinking, who the hell thought that one up? You know, but I didn't make the connections. You know, with Keith Richards. That guy's still alive too. That's the weird thing. That was like a quote somebody said, right? You know, the only thing that the young people need to worry about today is what kind of world they're going to leave for Willie Nelson and Keith Richards, you know? And I believe them. Keish says, I was a digital copywriter, used SEO to attract traffic. SEO is useful in e-commerce. I wrote for hotel websites and bought room and restaurant reservations, bookings. The manager had access to analytics. Okay, so they had all the analytics, but they didn't share that with you. Doesn't that kind of undermine you in doing your job if you don't know how effective the things you're doing are? You know, hey, you know, what do I know about hotel administration? Maybe that's how it goes. Keish says, I want to work in e-commerce now. Okay, I see. Okay, so that might be like, look, that's kind of a tricky situation if you've got to do a job, but the way of evaluating how effective you are has been withheld from you. So that is very unfortunate. That puts you at a bit of a disadvantage because it would have been awesome to be able to back up some of your assertions when you say, like, I do it this way and this way is more effective. You know, it'd be nice to be able to back that up and say, like, well, I've got the numbers to prove it. When we did the thing you're saying, it produced this many hits. When we did the thing that I'm saying, it produced 3 times that. You know, it's can't argue with results. You know what I mean? So it would have been really nice to do that. For some things, what I would do is, if you have absolutely no like data on how effective some of the things you were meant to do ended up being, I would do the minimum thing, the due diligence things, to go online and try and find out in general, like how, you know, effective different things are. So you could say, like, look, out in the real world, this gets 3 times the, you know, the numbers or the hits that does. You know, that's why I do this method. You know, something like that. It's hard to argue with that. You know, so it might be a possible partial substitute. You know what I mean? Another thing, of course, would be to try and, I don't know if this is possible, it's a long shot, but going back to someone at your workplace when you worked there, calling them up and saying, listen, you know, can you give me anything? I need some data about like the stuff I did. You know, if I'm going to say this was effective or it had this much improvement or whatever, it'd be nice to get some numbers. Can you give me anything, you know, and see what they can say. But yeah, that is a bit of a disadvantage, isn't it? Okay. Rose says, I meant that I'm still working and my employer and colleagues might find out from LinkedIn since I'm trying to promote my business. Yeah, I get it. I understand. Well, kind of what I said. I mean, you know, I would not promote your business openly, publicly to the public in a way that your employer can easily discover that because you've got it pasted all over your LinkedIn profile. I wouldn't do that. What I'm saying is you would go, you know, you would leave your LinkedIn profile more or less alone, right? Or at least not advertise you're trying to start up your own consulting firm. Then you would do your promotion as much for your consulting services as a much more targeted thing that goes specifically to individuals, right? and do it that way so that it minimizes the risk of your employer wisening up to the fact that you're trying to start something on the side. Okay, so that's what I would suggest there. And I would also recommend not jumping ship until you have your consulting stuff on the side well and truly in the bag. You've got money coming in. It's not just a one-time only thing. You've got more than one client, this kind of thing, right? If you really want to do it right, that's what you would wait for, right? Keish says, digital copywriter. Yeah, okay, we talked about that. Yash G says, sir, my college is arranging one-to-one discussion with corporate employee to ask advice, carrier questions. I am in last year IT engineering. What should I ask them? First company is Deutsche Bank. I don't know. I mean, what do you want to know? It depends entirely on your ambitions. Do you want to work in IT, or I'm not sure what IT engineering is. Is that like computer engineering? Are you interested in the career side of it? Are you interested in, management side? I can't tell you what to ask these people. It really is up to you to figure out, what you're interested in and what you care about. You know what I mean? It also depends on who the person is and what their area of expertise is, if you absolutely have no idea, right? Get the person to talk about what they do and how they got there. Maybe that might be useful to you. I don't know, but that's just the most obvious starting point. If you have no idea what the hell's going on, just say what do you do? What is it that you bring, and what do you do in your day-to-day job, and how is this a good thing, and where's it going? And how did you get there? How did you find yourself in this role? Is this something you worked up to over several steps, or is it a sort of entry-level job, or, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? That might be a good starting point, I suppose. Keish says, I want to work in e-commerce now. Okay. Well, then obviously you would learn everything you can about e-commerce. And the way to do that would be have informational interviews with people who are successfully working in e-commerce. They're the manager of an e-commerce division of a big company or something, right? So learn how to get informational interviews, learn how to conduct informational interviews, and then go out and talk to a bunch of these people, and they can give you real world pointers on how things actually work and what's important and what isn't. Okay, so learn about that. Here. Okay, everybody loves this, right? I'll make this bigger. Okay, informational interviews. What are they, and how would I get one? I'm doing this for you guys, by the way, just so you see that, you can start your research with things like ChatGPT, okay? So if you don't know, informational interviews are informal, two-way conversations between you and someone who works in a field or company you're interested in. Okay, so this is really the vehicle for you to learn anything at all. Okay, no matter how sensitive this information is, no matter how hard to find it is. Okay, as long as the information exists in someone's skull, this is how you can access it. Okay, so learn what these are, learn how to get them. Incidentally, I cover all this kind of stuff in my course. So if you want to learn how to do all this, one thing you could do with all the advice all in one place is go check that out. Link in the description. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, where are we here? Fish ship employee. That sounds like fish and chips. Fish and chips. 2 years ago, I got laid off and my side hustle became my main job. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear you got laid off. It's awesome that you managed to do a side hustle and turn it into your full-time thing. That shows a lot of ability. How to list that on my resume and how to answer about that on interviews. I heard it don't look God. It don't look God, lowercase g, of course, to own a business to employers. I think I'm coming down with a cold. I got a stuffy nose. You're absolutely correct. It does look bad. Here's the thing. This is the recruiter perspective, once again, a little bit. You and I both know that having your own business, being able to create your own business, this shows off incredible abilities, right? You understand on a fundamental level how business works. You understand what's important for business to work. And you understand what's trivial in the world of business, right? What's a distraction? You see, a lot of people working in large corporations, they don't know this. And that goes all the way up to executives a lot of times too, because they've never done this kind of thing. So they are fooled into thinking certain things are important and that they're important to the business. They sound important. They have a certain logic, but you and I know that they're not really important to the business, right? It's not what you should be focusing on. You see, you have that ability, right? A lot of those people that are the gatekeepers of, day jobs, right? Like where you're working as an employee, they don't know this stuff. Now, the problem with listing any kind of side hustle or home business on a resume is that you're signaling to the employer, I'm the type of person that has the ability to just do my own thing on the side, right? And if I'm successful in the thing that I'm doing on the side, I fully intend and have the ability to jump ship away from you, my employer, and go do my own thing, right? That's what it's signaling. And unfortunately, these people, they only see that aspect of it. Okay? So it can be a bit tricky because if you list the side hustle, then that's a red flag. If you don't list the side hustle, it looks like you got a work gap, right? So you have a couple of options here. First of all, what I would do, I just got to say this every time, is that I would not go through a recruiter. I would go directly to a hiring manager, to like a general manager or above, usually an executive, who understands this stuff, right? And say, look, I've been doing my own thing on the side for a few years now or whatever, and I'm looking to get back into the corporate world. And, I feel I can bring a lot of things back, to the corporate world. I have an understanding of this, the stuff you do, plus I've been in business, and I've been able to make money doing it. So I know it's important, as opposed to a lot of these people that don't, And if you're talking to somebody who gets that, like, at the executive level, if they're that type of person, then they will recognize that immediately, right? So doing informational interviews and things like that, you can get a lot of opportunities where you're speaking this language directly to someone who's got the authority to give you a job right there on the spot, and good things can happen. Good things often do, right? So that's the approach I would take. Now, if you're confining yourself to like going through recruiters and working at like sort of a low level, you got a couple of options. You could do the two things I said, state your side hustle on your resume, then you may get less bites, right? But you might still get a few. Or you could strip it off and it shows a work gap. So you could maybe say, like, I went back to school, go take a course, go register for a free online course today. Then it's technically not a lie. You're in school, and you just sort of use that as your cover story, right? And do it that way, right? But both of those kind of suck because you and I know that this thing that you did is awesome and you have a hell of a lot of skills. They should be happy to have someone like you working for them, but usually they're too stupid to recognize that. But those are your options the way I see it. Fish ship employee. I wish you best of luck. It's always tough. If you can possibly just double down on your business that you got going, take that to the next level, make your fortune. You know what I mean? Like that's the other obvious thing that may be an option for you. And if that is an option, that would be my number one choice. Why go back to being an employee if you've got your own thing going? If you just need a little bit of refinement to like maybe take it to the next level, maybe learn how to do that. Alpine's Pal says, no, it's not a joke. It's a real thing. I had a classmate that had random nosebleeds. Okay. Well, random nosebleeds is one thing, but the way you phrased it, I can't remember how you phrased it. It sounds like, you kept getting, a bloody nose. Now, a bloody nose is not the same thing as a nosebleed. It could be, but a bloody nose is caused by a fist to the face, whereas a nosebleed usually isn't, at least the way those terms are interpreted. Okay, so ha ha ha, right? An empty victory, but a victory nonetheless. Rose says, I was actually having random nosebleeds for the last 2 days. A symptom of something dangereux. Est-ce que c'est un symptôme ou quelque chose dangereux? Ben oui. Et qu'est-ce qu'il y a? So for Rose, this is something that we're going to have to address. Quiche says, haha, you got the pun. The Keith Richards handle in reference to Keith Richards. Don't you have to be like 80 years old to like make that connection? Seriously, like the Rolling Stones were before my time, and I'm like, I'm old, They were like the more dangerous kind of bad boy alternative to the Beatles, right? That was kind of the deal. But I did watch that movie they made about Altamont. That was interesting. Interesting stuff going on. Quiche says, thank you for addressing my questions again. All the best. And same to you, Quiche. It's been a pleasure. You're welcome, Rose. And thank you for being here and participating. Alpine's Pal is talking to Rose. Let's see here. Yash says, about any corporate life and their culture, I don't know. This is just random group discussion type. Okay. Yeah, okay, so this was like what question to ask the IT professional or something. Yeah, that's always a good thing. Getting them to tell their story, what they do, why it's important, and how they got there. There you go. Like, I've done tons of informational interviews with like executives in my career, mostly CEOs. And that's how I'd start off. For CEOs, and business people, like if they're general managers and up and they deal with like the revenue side and the cost side, it's like a great opening thing is just to say, how's business? Now that probably doesn't apply in the case of this IT professional. They're probably in operations, that kind of thing. But those like the way you learn from people is you ask them questions about them. Don't talk about yourself. Don't give them your life story. You ask questions about them. It's not about you. It's about them. Okay. That's instead of you talking at somebody, ask them questions, get them to talk. And then all you do is you ask follow-up questions to direct the conversation, right? Helicopters here. Helicopters in the house, if you will. Alpine's Pal says, so as I'm understanding, if you don't have a lot of work experience, the goal is to convince a manager that you're worth hiring because you really got what it takes. And when you do have professional job experience, you can use that to back yourself up. Essentially, it's a lot easier when you have experience, but you can still work with what you have to back yourself up. No, not really. I mean, first of all, there isn't one exact formula, okay? The world is a wide and interesting place. There's a lot of interesting people in it, all of which have different perspectives on pretty much everything, including what makes somebody capable and what makes you want to work with somebody, right? Different people and different types of people are going to have different answers to that, right? But the general thing, the number one thing is likability, right? Doesn't matter how qualified you are, people usually don't want to work with someone who's completely off-putting, right? Now, if you're very charismatic and you're very friendly and, that really, like, for the amount of trouble that takes or the amount of skill that takes to convince people of this, that's like a major, major boon if you have that, I would work on personal charisma, things like this. And then enthusiasm is a big one too, right? Just generally speaking, if you
people don't want to hire someone, or they don't want to work with someone who's just not into this, It's like they're kind of begrudgingly doing it for you as a favor. Nobody wants that, right? That's not the person you want to deal with, right? So these are kind of basic things. Now, technical skills are important, but a lot of technical people are honestly surprised at how it's not number one. Because the reality is that there's a lot of people that have the technical chops. For about 99% of jobs, you're not wanting for someone who has the ability. There are people out there with the technical ability. Okay? You can find those people. Especially if you're offering money, you can find those people. Usually you have several of them all competing for the same job. So the technical chops are really not what gets you hired. They make you a contender. They allow you to enter the competition. But from that point on, it's no longer about your technical chops. It just isn't. Even in, job interviews at the lower level stuff where they bring you in for an interview and then they give you all these, essentially give you an exam. Here, solve all these problems. Let's test your knowledge of this and that. It's really not about that. Yeah, what they're doing is they're doing that because they don't trust the qualifications, or there are no qualifications if it's stuff in IT that's very new. Maybe there's no standardized, accredited, educational credential for that yet that we trust. You know what I mean? So we're going to test your ability. But that's not what gets you hired, And if you don't believe me, if you're a technical whiz, go to a job interview and say really rude things the whole time, and let's see how quickly you get hired. I'd be willing to guarantee that you'll be waiting a very long time. I don't care how brilliant you are. So, you know what I mean? It's about enthusiasm, it's about likability, and it's about initiative. So if you are enthusiastic about doing something and you're reaching out to people and you're saying, listen, I would like to work, I would like to talk to you because I aspire to do what you're doing. You're doing this kind of work. I think that's fantastic. I think it's really, really awesome, especially going into the future. There's all kinds of possibilities for using this stuff, and you could use this to solve all kinds of problems, make a ton of money. I think it's a fantastic thing. I would like to learn as much as I possibly can about it. And if ever you're looking for someone to help you, hello, I'm right here. I would love the opportunity. It's very, if you're a hiring manager looking for somebody, it's very hard to say no to that. You know what I mean? Because as long as this person isn't putting their foot in their mouth and saying a bunch of totally false things, that's exactly what you're looking for. That's what most people would agree is a really promising employee. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense there. I think it's Alpine's pal who asked about that. This feed keeps jumping on me. I apologize. I'm sort of looking confused off to the side because this thing keeps, I'm reading and all of a sudden just goes like that. And there's nothing I can do to sort of anchor it. I have tried that. Alex says something. Bro. What's up, bro? My weakness is I'm overly confident. Yeah, fail. Rose, thinking in French and writing in English. Yeah, that's how it goes sometimes. Thinking in Swahili, writing in Welsh, the usual kind of stuff. Yash says, thank you, sir, for addressing my concern. You are doing a great job. Best wishes. Thank you, Yash. That's very kind of you. I appreciate it. Alpine's Pal says, another idea. Oh, here we go again. You're just lots of ideas. My weakness is that I've been bullied in the past. Nope, don't go there. And I sometimes have a tough time dealing with bad people. Nope, but I'm a nice person, especially if people don't push my buttons. Well, you've told me you're a nice person, so I automatically believe you. That's the important thing. That really makes a lot of sense, albeit we've hit that point many times, many ways. Merry Christmas, but seriously. Okay. Yeah, I would not recommend that answer for what is your weakness. But thank you for playing. Okay, there are 30 people here. Get in the chat. You know you want to. Who wouldn't want to talk to me? I'm so handsome and I'm so thin. That's like 2 out of 2. That's all you need in this world, isn't it? Oh, and apart from my boyish good looks, that people feel threatened by them. So if you feel threatened by my sense of style and boyish good looks, then you've come to the right place, because I'm here to answer all your questions about life, the universe, and everything, and job interviews, all wrapped up into one really annoying package. But we've had some great questions from a lot of awesome people so far this session. I thank you for your participation. This is great. Any questions you have about careers, job search, all that kind of stuff, including, ironically, networking and the hidden job market, that's really where everything is. Don't take my word for it. Go out and do the most basic research and you'll see for yourself if this is a surprise to you. That's really where everything is. So, the skills to really be able to tap that, discover those opportunities, put yourself forward for those opportunities, those are very, very useful skills indeed. So, we're here to talk about that stuff too. And if you're looking for like the sort of ultimate guide on how to do that stuff, things like direct outreach, things like informational interviews, check out this course. I put all that stuff in one course in one place with a logical progression. So that's where I put all my advice on that. Check it out. There's a link in the description. And I've also made videos that describe the course and tell you how it works and what you get. So it's as transparent as possible. So check that out. Okay, where are we here? Pilot Nelson says, Nevada cyber attack, no state background checks for 2 weeks. Nearly all hiring is at a full stop. Your thoughts on alternative methods to get around this? Ever seen this happening before? Yeah, I mean, IT systems go down all the time. Cyber attacks happen constantly. Yeah. And yes, there is an alternative. It's called the hidden job market, and that's where 80% of the jobs are. So that's where you would look. I will do this again. Just because people don't believe me when I talk about this stuff. So here. Okay, so of all the jobs that exist out there, how many of them are posted publicly? Let's start with that. It's an extremely fast computer system. Maybe it's gone down. So only about 20 to 30% of jobs are posted publicly. It's actually 15 to 20%, somewhere in there. The majority, 70 to 80% of jobs are not posted publicly. Instead, they're in the hidden job market. Okay? So that alone, I think that alone, like before we even go any further, that's where you should be looking. That's where 80% of the jobs are, right? Every job I've gotten in the last 20 years has been like in the hidden job market. And not only that, but it's like a way to get over all the biases and weird kind of, ways of valuing people that recruiters do. Their way of evaluating people, it serves a purpose. It's great for a specific situation. It's great for if you're looking for people at the bottom, the sort of worker level, entry level, up to professional level jobs. And, it's biased against things like generalists or people with work gaps or people, switching careers. For all those things, you usually have to go outside of the posted job market into the hidden job market. And that's where you can, these things aren't this disadvantage that you may have been led to believe they are. People switch careers every day. It's very hard to switch careers going through a recruiter. So if the system of background checks is down, which, you really need in a corporate environment, because you're going through the recruiter standard hiring process, the recruitment and selection process in a lot of larger employers. then you just revert to this. And a lot of people are exclusively looking in the hidden job market anyway, so it doesn't really affect them. And think about it. If you've never seen this before, okay, the way that manifests is in larger employers. If you have a general manager or an executive that wants to hire you, you can be damn sure they're not going to be held up by the recruiter deep down in the bowels of the HR department saying, well, I'm sorry, our system for background checks is not working right now, so you'll have to put hiring this employee you want on hold. See how well that goes over, when you try and tell that to them. Alpine's Palace is a common question in applications is if you have relatives or friends that are currently or formerly working for us, our specific organization, is that a good or a bad thing? It's whatever the hell these fools want it to be. Now, to be kind, maybe a legitimate purpose in asking that is to flag possible accusations of nepotism, right? So if your father is working like as the general manager or the vice president in charge of that division of the company or something, and you're starting in like, in like a management position below them or something like that, like maybe that creates a bit of a conflict of interest. Maybe they have official policies of not employing close family members working together, things like this, right? So to be kind, maybe that's what they're going for here. But that assumes that these people have brains and they know what they're doing, which usually they don't. And it's probably more for some silly HR related policy that is just arbitrary. You know what I mean? The other thing is that, isn't, depending on where you live in the world, isn't that like a bit of an overstep? Like they're asking for very personal information about you that maybe they're not entitled to. You know what I mean? You can maybe disclose that voluntarily, but the fact that you must tell them things like this, maybe that's not the best thing in the world if you're afraid of like certain biases against it. All of a sudden, they're about to hire you, but then you say, well, I have a cousin working here, and they go, oh, sorry, then we can't hire you. It's like, what? You were about to hire me. I'm qualified. What's the problem? I don't work with them. I don't even get along with them that well, So it's one of those things you can debate till the cows come home. Different people are going to have different perspectives on it. If you don't like the way a company's hiring policies are, you just apply somewhere else. You know what I mean? There's different perspectives on these things. Fish Ship Employee says, thanks for today. I learned a lot as usual. You're awesome. Well, thank you, Fish Ship. I'm glad it was useful for you. Alpine's Pal. Okay, so I can say my weakness is that I may get frustrated, but if it happens, no, I wouldn't say that. Listen, Alpine's Pal, you need to go back and listen to my answer. I've already given you my recommended answer on this. So, this is what I advise. So when somebody goes, well, could I say, and then like they give you something you totally didn't say to do. It's like, the blanket answer is probably no. I would not recommend that. So, maybe either just accept my answer or, or stop asking me about it. One or the other. Yeah, I mean, I already said, don't talk about having a bad temper, saying I get frustrated easily or anything like. Those are red flags. Like, those are going to be viewed as major red flags by a recruiter or by most people. They don't know you. You're making a first impression, and that person, a stranger walks in. You don't know anything about them. And then the first thing out of their mouth is basically, well, I get really, really upset over this. It's like, that's really not doing yourself any favors. I don't know anything about you except now that you get like really angry. So chances are I'm not going to investigate you anymore. I'm just going to eliminate you here and proceed with people that haven't given me major red flags so far. You know what I mean? That's the end result. Rose says, I will definitely look at your courses. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, well, if they work for you, Rose, then great. It depends what people are looking for. And what I did is I put all my advice in one place in the course. The thing is, when you're talking about the hidden job market, I found that I can't chop it up into little 5-minute things like that you would put in videos, because there's a lot of principles, and they all are acting at the same time. So it makes it very hard to talk about one principle in isolation, because you can't sort of then conclude that you would do something because of that principle. It's not as simple as that, right? It takes into account a lot of assumptions, right? So I found that, the only place I could really talk about that stuff properly is in a course, because you can lay everything out and then say, these are all the principles that are in play right now. So now that you understand what's going on, now we can talk about what to do, and then it's more intelligent, But it takes a long time to go through to go through what's going on, how everything works, what you're walking into, why everything works like that, But you need to understand all of that before you can decide what to do. You know what I mean? That's the practical problems I found in explaining this stuff to people. Where are we here? Alpine's pal did the little that kind of stuff, yay or nay. I would say nay for the anything that mentions I may get frustrated. Any kind of mention of frustration or a temper or anything like that, that's a deal breaker. Alpine's pal says, yeah, I'm most likely misunderstanding. I need to do more research and reviewing. Sorry for the inconvenience that telemarketers say. Okay. Alpine's pal, what I'd recommend for you is for you to just go and do a bunch of job interviews, apply for stuff and just go see if you can get some interviews. Now, failing that, try and get some informational interviews and then try and do direct outreach. Those are two very popular methods of tapping the hidden job market. And the purpose of this is also to, you just said, I'm just misunderstanding. Get some experience under your belt. You won't misunderstand anymore. You'll understand exactly what the rules are and how these things play out, and then we may be able to have a bit more of a productive conversation that will help you get to the next level, that's what I would say. You just need some experience on your belt. I don't know, but it seems like you've already done enough research. You've already been on several of my live streams and stuff, which is great. I appreciate it. And hopefully you're getting something out of it. But I think the time has come for you to get a lot more practical experience. Then you'll understand where I'm coming from and where some of these principles are coming from. You know what I mean? Just try stuff, If you want to learn about interviewing, you want to learn about the hidden job market, just jump in, try some things. Okay? That's there's a limit to the amount of advice and research that, before there's a law of diminishing returns. You know what I mean? Get some hard experience, try a few things, then you can come back to the advice and the research and you'll get a lot more out of it because you've got a larger experience base. And there you go. Now, I am going to wind this down in a couple of minutes. So if anyone has any last minute questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. I have another live stream coming up in 20 minutes. So it's be a short intermission, then I'll be back on my channel live. In the meantime, check out these courses, especially this one, if you are between jobs or you're wondering how the whole job search thing really works, especially the hidden job market. What is it? How can I get in there and find opportunities? How can I put myself up for opportunities? I cover all that in this course. Okay, I do cover the post-a-job market, going through recruiters, job interviews, resumes, all that kind of stuff. But the hidden job market is the real gem. That's where all the action is. That's where all the jobs are. That's where all the good jobs are. And as an added bonus, with the cherry on top, it's also a much more positive process. You know, you're dealing with people that are treating you like a human being, generally speaking, rather than cattle, right? Which is usually what you can expect when you are pursuing stuff in the post-job market. Okay, so check that out. There's a link in the description, and I've also made videos that describe the course. I've made videos for all of my courses that describe the courses. So if you're interested in any of them, watch the videos. It'll hopefully answer all your questions, and then you can make a decision whether it's really what you're looking for. The other thing that people here might be interested in is this. That's how to learn above average communication skills, which is necessary for climbing the ladder if you're ambitious and you want to get sort of higher level jobs and you want to be seen as a contender to get a promotion and move upward. If that's important to you, this is something you might be interested in. That's the communication skills component of what you need to be a contender. So check that out. There's a link in the description. And it's more for business and entrepreneurial type stuff, but if you're interested in learning business, which is the scientific study of how to make money, check out this course. I created this as a solution to some people who are looking to learn the concepts and the material, but they don't want to pay big bucks. They don't want to go back to school, full-time or even like half-time. They want to do this completely on their own schedule, on their own terms. And maybe they don't even want to learn all of business. Maybe they're only interested in learning one or two areas of it of interest to them. Like they want to learn marketing or something, or they want to learn sales, or accounting or finance or, whatever, quality, whatever you're interested in. Maybe that's all you're interested in. You don't care about the whole shebang-a-bang. You just want that little piece. This allows you to do that. So you can get the same outcome as you would get in a brick and mortar MBA program at a university, but at a fraction of the price and a lot more convenient. So check that out. Links in the description. Alpine's Pal says, yeah, it's a great point. That's what I meant by showing up isn't enough, and I stumble and get overwhelmed and give up. It's embarrassing to admit, as you can see, many opportunities lost. Yeah, Alpine's Pal, don't worry about it too much. You're pushing, you're trying to learn, you're trying to expand your capabilities, and that's what the game's about. This stuff works like anything else, like business in general. Learning is expensive. Learning is painful. We make a lot of mistakes along the way. And, that's just the name of the game. If you don't ever want to do anything inefficiently and you don't ever want to make a mistake, you would never try anything and you would certainly never learn anything. So don't worry about it. Just keep pushing. Okay? Anyway, I will be back in about 15 minutes on this channel. Until then, thank you guys for being here. You're awesome. Tune in next week at the same time for another edition of How to Get Hired, and I will see you soon. Take care.